I'm not sure who's in the boardroom. I'm coming from home, so zooming in. So maybe I could ask for some assistance.
We could introduce ourselves
Okay, that's great.
because we know who we are. Yeah, science.
Hi, Penny. This is Daniel. I'm here.
Hi, Daniel.
Oh, John McNabb, I'm Regional District Director for Beaver Creek.
We haven't started the meeting yet. Maybe you could do it so that it's in the recording. If that's all right.
He's anxious.
We'll wait for you to start and we'll do a round table.
Okay, so it is 10 o'clock. So I will call this Electoral Area Directors Committee meeting to order at 10 o'clock on July 27th, 2022, and recognize that we're coming from the traditional territories of the Tishat and the Hupuchesset First Nations, and that we're also coming from other areas. And I'm not sure where you're coming from, where people are today. If you want to acknowledge the territory you're on, you're more than welcome. Thank you. So at this time, I will do introductions of the committee members and staff that are present in the room, and I will allow you to just go around the room, starting with Director McNabb. Thank you.
Today, Director McNabb, Regional District Director for Beaver Creek.
Kel Roberts, Area C Director, the West Coast. Thank you.
Yuyanaka, planner.
Mike Kirk, I'm the General Manager of Planning and Development.
Good morning, Wendy Thompson, General Manager of Administrative Services for the Regional District.
Good morning. I'm Daniel Sayan, the CAO for the ACRD.
Thank you.
I was just we also have Graham Tate, who is a member of the Beaufort Agency here today.
Thank you.
We also have one attendee online.
Great, thank you. And there is Tanya Shannon, Bob Beckett, and Diane Bodner on Zoom, and myself, Penny Cody, the chair. I'd like to notice that to the attendees and delegates that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to YouTube on the Regional District website. Okay, thank you. We have an agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda, please? Moved by Bob, second by Diane. Is anyone not in favor? That's carried. Thank you. We have minutes of the Electoral Area Directors Committee meeting held February 24th, 2022. Need a motion to receive these minutes, please.
So moved.
By Bob Beck, or sorry, by Kel Roberts, and second by Diane Bodner. Is there anyone, is there any corrections or anybody not in favor? Not seeing anything? That's carried. Thank you. Correspondence for information. Graham Tate, zoning bylaw review. So I'll pass this to staff.
Hi, everybody. So we've received a letter from Graham Tate just regarding the zoning bylaw and the differences between the electoral areas, and just commenting that, you know, there could be separate zoning bylaws for the different electoral areas. So certainly I can touch on that a little bit. It is something over the years that has been discussed with the board and amongst staff. Really the big challenge would be around resources and also consistency. So we do have a wide range of zones. that apply to large acreages, farming, to more developed areas, say in Beaver Creek and Cherry Creek, as well as the waterfront developed properties in Squirrel Lake and Bamfield. We do have separate official community plans for each electoral area, which I think serves the electoral areas well. I would note that the current OCP in Beaufort, talks about maintaining large acreages, discourages any development less than 2 hectares or 5 acres. So some of those things are already incorporated. Developing separate zoning bylaws for each electoral area. There's the process and then management part. I would require significant increase in resources in the planning department just to manage it and get through that component. And just anecdotally or to note that other regional districts within BC, some have separate zoning bylaws. Some actually have areas that aren't covered by zoning. So we're in our regional district, we have the entire regional district covered by zoning. And what we're seeing is other regional districts are going to more a single zoning bylaw, in some cases single OCPs. So I'm not recommending that we go to a single OCP, but just the consolidation for administration, just the amount of time it takes administering each of the bylaws, could be a challenge. But certainly happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Director McNabb?
So my comment with regards to the RV situation in here, and we face this all the time, but I mean, I own a couple of RVs and I know how they're constructed and the shortcomings that exist in as far as living in them 24/7. The RVs are not designed to be lived in on a full-time basis. They don't meet a building code for a residential structure. And things like access and egress, the size of the doorways, the size of the hallways, the roofing materials, the type of venting that's in place. If you live in these things year-round, they will mold, and they pick up a lot of condensation because of the type of heat in them, which is propane. And it's an ongoing battle to, even if you're not living in them year-round, to make sure that they're not leaking. Because I have a 2015 unit, and if you don't keep at it every year, recocking it, doing everything you need to do, you will pick up leaks. In fact, they even tell you that you got to check it every 6 months. But they're not designed for that. I mean, if we're going to put people in structures that are going to be used like an RV would be used, then they better be mobile homes, because mobile homes are built to a different standard. So it's the other part of it is when an RV is lived in on a residential or rural property, there's no taxation change. It isn't considered as an improvement, and therefore all of the things that need to be supported by taxation are not. And so it's there's lots of reasons for it, and I can see some reasons to support living in RVs, but it is not the type of structure that should be lived in full time. Even when you get up to the ones that are called destination models, they're not. Park models, a little different, probably can, but they're more like a mobile home than they are an RV.
Thank you. Director Beckett, or sorry. Sorry. Director Cal Roberts. Thanks.
I know we're brothers, but my question is through the chair to Mr. Erg. Are these tiny homes that are built on trailer chassis, are they considered to be RVs?
So we're working on figuring out how the tiny homes sort of fit in. So certainly they can be homes if they meet BC building code requirements. Most of them don't. We have a couple of files that we're working on and just trying to determine, you know, the closest they have is RVs, right? So a lot of the tiny homes that we're seeing sort of around BC or online do not meet BC building code, and these are issues that I think almost every regional district in BC is dealing with. So we have a planning managers forum for all the regional districts, and this is a topic of discussion that's coming up regularly, and trying to work on it. Just with regard to RVs, where we do permit them, is when somebody has a building permit out, they're allowed to occupy an RV while the home's being constructed. That's something that is always been permitted in the regional district. And just my other comment around RVs, because we're seeing it, but I always have concerns if they become rental units as well, right? So, we're seeing people occupying them, but I think out there we're also seeing people renting RVs, and as they become cheaper, they sort of in the hierarchy of where things rents are, they can be cheaper, and always concerned about the living situations for everybody that's using them, and at least with mobile homes and stick-built homes, we have processes for ensuring that they meet a minimum standard. I think that's the issue Director McNabb brought up. I think that's a concern, is making sure that they're safe and bad things don't happen to people as well. So
Yeah, thank you for that.
Director Beckett.
I wanted to give you an opportunity to get the name straight there, Chair. Only kidding. I just want to mention that later on in the agenda, I will speak to the terms of or the duration of rental of an RV, which is currently pegged at 60 days, but I'll speak to that later. I would like to make the motion that the committee receive this item for information.
Thank you. I need a seconder. Director Shannon. Thank you. Is there any further comments? If not, is there anyone who opposes this motion? Seeing none, that's carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Request for decision timeline for this zoning bylaw review project. Back to staff. Thank you.
thank you. So I'll just run through a few notes, things I want to touch on and highlight, and then certainly like to get feedback and questions from the directors. So I just to start, staff are recommending that first reading and public hearing for the new zoning bylaw be presented in January 2023, and just a delay for the next 5 months. And I just want to say the report provides a timeline, and we need to keep in mind, as well as the zoning bylaw, there are 6 OCP amendments that have already received first reading and will require public hearing and adoption before the zoning bylaw could be adopted. The OCPs are minor amendments, but would bring the OCPs to in line with what's in the proposed zoning bylaw, and that's something that's required by the Local Government Act. So that's why we're doing it that way. There is a proposal to do full, or staff have a work plan for doing full reviews, all of the OCPs through 2023 to 2025. So between now and January, sort of the board or the committee supports the staff recommendation. Staff would, between now and January, continue to work on the project and review with agencies and First Nations so that everything is prepped and ready to go in January. Based on the committee's recommendations on the next report, we would provide update the version of the bylaw and post it on our website, but no formal information process or anything like that, but make it available to the public. Also, in this propose this report. Staff proposed a electoral area directors committee meeting in December to review the bylaw before it would be presented for first reading. I also want to point out that there's a section that highlights the proposed benefits. Oh, sorry, I want to back up a bit. I want to talk about the timeline. And just there's a timeline presented there. So, each step, each point, the next one is dependent on the previous one or most of them. So that timeline is presented as something that is achievable. I'd say it's a very tight timeline, but it is achievable. I also want to point out that there's a section in the report that talks about the highlights highlights the benefits of the updated zoning bylaw. And just take a look at those. One of the ones I really want to highlight is the increased ability for home occupations and then introducing home industry. It's something that we have had in our OCPs for a number of years. And one of the goals in the zoning bylaw was to allow more of those opportunities. So within home occupation, right now, the way the bylaw is written, it's limited to inside a home, where the proposed zoning bylaw would allow it to be in a garage or a shop as well. And we do have instances where this is happening and it's working well, but we want to create a level playing field for everyone. So I think that's the other thing there. I would note the other component or part of our work that's impacted by this is the other development applications. So the report touches on that we do currently have 22 rezoning applications that we have received or are in process that still would require public hearing and et cetera. So that is there as well. And things continue to be very busy. I did a quick added up the development applications we had received, sort of to just after the beginning of July. We're at 70, which is significantly higher than we've normally seen it, and we're just seeing that increase. And again, one of the benefits of the new zoning bylaw would help. It would be there's more things are more permissive, but also more readable and useful for the public. So I will stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Director Beckett.
Thank you very much. I just want to comment that I was really pleased to see, I think it's on page 8 of the report, the benefit section. And I think for me, as an electoral area director, the two questions that I want to be able to nail moving forward as we get closer to this, to establishing these timelines, is why the changes and what are the benefits, with a focus on benefits. And I'd like to see that flushed out for Bamfield. I can't speak for the other directors, but moving forward, when I'm on the boardwalk, when I'm down at the store, I want to be able to very positively be able to respond to why we're making the changes, and most importantly, what are the benefits. And I think moving forward, that needs to be on the website, that reflects current proposed changes. And just like to thank the board and staff, for their due diligence and their patience in moving this forward.
Thank you. Do staff want to reply?
Yeah, thank you, Director Beckett. And we will certainly flesh that out and provide some information to the board. I mean, that's really some of the background work that we can continue to do on this project. And again, I think that's really important for the public to understand why we're doing it and how it benefits. That was why I wanted to touch on the home occupations. I know we had some people that were concerned about the zoning bylaw and over-regulating it. And really, our goal from the beginning is to allow the things that aren't currently permitted that make sense.
Director McNabb?
So a couple of things that I had in here on the recommendation line. The increase in the number of roosters, which keeps coming up. I mean, it seems like such a ridiculous thing, but people living next door to it don't think so. On the last part of it, plus one additional rooster and one per hectare, or 250 or 2.5 acres. I think we need to put adult roosters in there because if you've got little chicks being hatched, you're not quite sure what they are for a while, and it is necessary to have junior roosters in the stream because the adult roosters tend to not have a very long lifespan if they're protecting a brood. So I think it needs to have so that we're not counting as soon as a chick is born and it's a rooster, then you have to get rid of it. So it doesn't make sense. And if you want to make sense of it, that's it. The other thing was number 4. I mean, I think what I'd like to see is a map with a residential and rural zonings, like rural acreage type zonings, because the one that we actually look at online isn't, you don't get the whole picture of what it is. And because I think in residential areas where you've got neighbors next door and so forth, this makes sense. Although if they're in the backyard and they are fenced or screened, it isn't really much of a problem.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I think that we're talking about the timeline right now.
Well, this is part of the report, isn't it? Are we still?
I think that's the next report.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll stand by.
Okay, thank you. So is there any questions about the timeline that we have here and we need a motion? Director Shannon, is that for a motion or?
Comments and I'll make the motion.
Okay,
Do you want a seconder before I talk?
sure. Director Beckett, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to see that this is being postponed a little bit during the election process. I think it's a smart move. My concern is, and I know it's a tight though achievable timeline. When we look down on page 8, the anticipated zoning bylaw review project timeline, where it gets bumped to, when we look at public hearings and electoral area OCP amendments, and I realize it did state in there that there would be an EA directors meeting for the new board to get caught up on this. But if there's a number of new directors, without experience sitting on the board, coming from experience being new this term, that might be a little bit tight to get caught up on everything and the background of everything to start talking with the public and constituents going forward. Just a thought.
Thanks. I did see Director Roberts and McNabb and Beckett's hand up there. And I'm not sure if they were making motions or Director Roberts.
Yeah, through the chair, thank you. I'm quite pleased actually to see that the timelines have been extended out. And I do agree with Director Shannon's comments about a new board perhaps coming in, new members. And I think it's, trying to push this information, and I use that sort of reluctantly, push, to get these completed. I think these bylaw amendments are so important, and for the zoning bylaw and the OCP amendments, I think that, it's far better to stretch them out a bit and give everybody an opportunity to review them. Not only the new directors, but also the public as well, those people that are affected by it. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Director McNabb?
So I'm kind of thinking the other way. I mean, we've been involved in this for the last, I don't know how many years. You know, so I mean, it's something that we have heard from the public. We've had plenty of time to discuss it and everything else. My vision of the way of thinking is that we get paid to do this job till the day we don't. So we should be doing whatever we're supposed to be doing until the last day of our tenancy. So it's I get that it might affect, you know, the way that people think about they vote or whatever, but I mean that's kind of the business we're in, and you know, putting this off can be detrimental to upcoming development and zoning and everything else. So it needs to be done. I mean, I sympathize with everybody that's thinking that it's going to be negatively impact their election platform or results, but we have work to do. And I mean, if we put this off, what else are we going to put off? And then to me, we need to just keep on trucking and do the things that we're supposed to be doing. Thank you.
Mr. Salin, please.
Thank you. I just think answering, just to reply on both sides of, you know, the delay or moving forward. And I think beyond the fact that there is an election, the challenge that we face is that if we were to push through and try and get as much done prior to an election, the reality of any changes or change in board constitution would also likely mean that we're backing up to step one again. And so we don't want to do work that would potentially have us lose that work and start over. So, you know, I know there's an optic side, but there's also an operational side that we don't want to focus on things that we might have to start over anyway. In terms of the January start and the timelines in there, I think there's also fair comments there that there'll be a lot of meetings in that period. And there is a reality that if there is anything that comes out of a public hearing, because that's the point of a public hearing, that constitutes a bit of a redraft, then there is more of a delay. So you'd see that timeline stretch out. We've had the discussion as staff around identifying specific dates, like seeing the March consideration date. I'm replacing that with the amount of time, weeks, months that the process takes. And although identifying the months would be more accurate, so if there's a delay, you can say, well, it takes 4 weeks to do this next step. It also doesn't necessarily give people the same frame, a reference frame to talk about when it is that something's going to be completed. So all comments are fair. What I wanted to say is we opted to put in specific dates. The reality of those specific dates is that the only one that we can be certain of is the January one. And then based on information coming in, that March date or the February dates may have to slide back. It's just part of the reality of public outreach.
Thank you. So we do have a motion on the floor. If there's no more questions, we'll call the question. Is there anybody not in favor of this motion? Director McNabb, everyone else is in favor? So that carries. Thank you. All right, on to the next. So now it is the request for decision zoning bylaw review project, July 2022 update and next steps. So back to staff. Thank you.
So thank you. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the staff recommendations and then open it up for all the directors. I think there's probably going to be comments around each one. I want to start with the docs and just focus a little bit on that, because I think that has been, you know, one of the areas I think that we've had the most feedback on, and I think a change, you know, maybe what appears to be a change in sentiment among you know, some of the residents. So I want to explain a little bit about that first. So again, staff are recommending all of these 6 changes be included into the draft bylaw. But I want to talk about with the docks and highlight some of our freshwater lakes are on the east side of what is called the ENN land grant line. So there's an ENN land grant line that actually runs through Sprout Lake and the end of Great Central Lake, and it goes from Strathcona Park down to Victoria. And that was the land that was deeded to the railway way back when. What that means is the beds of the lakes are privately owned, whereas on the other side of the ENN land grant line and on Sprout Lake, I would say about a third of the homes on Sprout Lake, the bed of the lake is owned by the province, and about 2/3 the bed of the lake fronting those properties is owned by Mosaic. And currently we don't have regulations for docks. And to date, the province has not regulated docks on the Mosaic side of the ENN land grant line. Mosaic's position is that they own the bed of the lake, so they will manage or are responsible for anchoring points, but not the surface of the lake. Local governments in the regional district has the ability to regulate the surface of the lake. As staff and Amy drafted all of this, followed the provincial guidelines for docks where a special permission from the province is not required. So that was the smaller docks that a lot of people have complained about. And part of our goal or objective was to have a level playing field for specifically around Sprout Lake, because that's where the majority of the docks are and the majority of the input, feedback, complaints that staff get. Certainly, this is completely 100% a board decision as far as where we go. I do want to point out that every year for as long as I've worked at the regional district, we have dealt with a significant amount of complaints and inquiries and discussions around docks, specifically on Sprout Lake, and get a lot of, we aren't regulating, we aren't doing things. I think most everybody's aware of the issues, where small bays, docks go in front of people, the docks, especially on lakes, function more as an extension of people's yards as opposed to moorage for boats. So I wanted to highlight those things as we have the discussion about where we're going. But I think it's important to highlight if we don't have regulations for docks, we as a regional district can't do anything about it, because we can't not have regulations but be asked to regulate. There's been a lot of discussion around good neighbor policies, and I agree that if we have good neighbor policies and everybody follows it, then there's no need for the regulations. That's certainly not what we've seen in all instances. Again, I'd say the majority of the people do everything correctly. So I wanted to highlight sort of the rationale and some of the thoughts as far as why the zoning regulations for docks were brought in, and also some of the impacts on changing or not changing or not having zoning regulations. I do also just want to highlight that the new draft, the OCPs that have had first reading, so specifically around Sprout Lake, have extended development permit areas that would cover the water. So in the past, we haven't had that, and then they would also increase the upland areas. And I would note that Bamfield has had those development permit areas over the water for docks for, I think, 15 years. So, it certainly worked there, and as staff, we have experience with those types of development permits. So that's something that's also in there, and that's not dependent on zoning. But the purpose of a development permit is to regulate or protect the environmental factors. So it's not to regulate size or anything like that, but to ensure that there's no everything's done in an environmentally safe, low impact way. So I'm going to stop there because I expect there'll be some discussions around docks. And what I would suggest we just run through 1 through 6 and have the discussion on these topics, so that we can staff can get some direction on what we should do moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Open for questions. Director McNabb.
So I don't, or has staff looked at the legal liability side of regulation and no regulation, as far as if we have the ability to regulate and we don't regulate, does it put the BCRD in a position where we could be legal liable if there's an occurrence?
Not with respect to zoning. So zoning, it is up to the board to adopt sort of whatever types of zoning regulations or not that they wish to have. And we have had this, like the draft has been reviewed by our lawyers. So we've had an initial legal review to make sure we're not sort of going out of bounds on things that way. So, but there isn't, and it's not a precedent issue. We can have zoning for wharfs, for example, in Banfield and not in Sprout Lake. That's something the board can do legally. That's permitted. We currently have varying regulations as far as specifically over dock areas and what we do in different areas of the regional district, and that's, I mean, it's legal. It's done in all kinds of areas. So it's really a matter of the precedent component is more about just being fair. Legally, we can adopt things however we wish.
Thank you. Director Roberts.
Yeah, through the chair, to Mr. Is there a correlation between the size of the dock, the area, and say a boathouse? Is it considered to be one and the same, or is it a separate entity?
They're separate entities. I'm probably going to ask you to jump in and just talk about some of the technical aspects if I get it, if I don't get it quite right. So most of, I guess the issue, I want to back up a little bit about the inland land grant discussion and the private bed of the lake, and where the province has historically not actively managed docks on the private side of the lake, where they actively manage the crown side of the lake, and they everybody's allowed a dock of a certain size on the crown portion. Base, and it's different for freshwater versus ocean. It's a little bit bigger in the ocean. So Banfield, under the provincial regulations, not ours, the docks can be a little bit bigger there. I would say where most of the issues come up is in the in the private side of the on the private side of Sprout Lake, and not so much on Great Central Lake. It's really focused. Same issues happen in other lakes like Shawnigan Lake and Cowichan Lake. Similar types of issues. So that's, I'm not sure if I've answered your question correctly there.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from Amy what her comments are about boathouses and both in fresh and saltwater.
So we have actually set up or proposed our zoning to differentiate between marine and fresh, just like the province does. So marine is a little bit longer extent, etc., for the dock size. When we first started talking about improvements such as roof structures, as we know, the province simply does not allow them, right? You have to apply for specific permission for those boathouses. From what I understand, we don't really hear a lot, maybe Director Beck can speak to this, boathouses in marine environment, you don't really hear many complaints about those, correct? Or
certainly as staff, we don't hear
yeah.
them.
So perhaps Director Beck can speak to that. In terms of roof structures in freshwater, what we're currently proposing here is, so beyond what the province permits, because the province does not permit it, we're proposing to allow a larger size, right? 250 square feet. So that's based on lots of comments around being able to protect bodies and people as well as boats, and larger boats too. So maybe I'll stop there, see if Director Beck has anything to add around structures in marine environments.
Please.
Yeah, thank you. I've not had any feedback regarding the structure aspect. I have had feedback on the legalities associated with a dock owner able to lease a portion of his dock to someone who is landlocked, so a landlocked resident or a seasonal visitor.
Thank you. Did that answer your question, Mr. Roberts? Director Roberts?
Thank you. Yeah, sort of indirectly. I was looking at the dock roof structure and thinking, and I understand what Amy said about it. Yeah, and the increase is great. I just, I mean, I guess you could use that for boat lifts or something along those lines, or is it just to protect people that are on the dock and give them some coverage or something? Anyway, that's fine. Thanks.
Thank you. Director McNabb.
So I'm just curious as to whether the 12 feet maximum height is from the water or from the wharf.
Can staff answer that?
I think we are thinking wharf, yes, from the wharf.
We need to verbalize that.
We can clarify that, just so it's clear that it's 12 feet above the deck of the wharf. But that was our intent.
Okay, the last wharf I had there was 3 feet above the water because they used float logs and they were out of the water by 3 feet. So that's 15 feet.
And I think, we can make these adjustments. We're trying to accommodate some of the feedback we've had through the open houses, and find it. So none of this is set in stone. So, again, if there's concerns about certain sizes or heights, then we can make that adjustment. I mean, from my perspective, the province doesn't allow wharfs without a special permission. Right. So the current timeline, just so that everybody's aware, if somebody on the Taylor Arms side of Sproat Lake wants to build a dock bigger than is sort of the minimum size permitted by the province or have a structure or boathouse on it, it's a 2-year process before the province gets that approved. Boathouses, structures on docks, again, create that shading, which is not necessary. It's not conducive or low impact. It doesn't have it has a high impact on the environment, on the fish habitat, those types of things.
I stand corrected. Sorry, it took me a second to find it. We have proposed maximum height of a dock roof, 3.7 meters, as it's above the surface of the water. So happy to receive feedback on that if that's not.
No, I mean, I just want to make sure we're clear because there's certainly ways to make adjustments if you're not having it stated.
Is there any other questions at this time about docks? Just one question. Because these changes have been made, there would be opportunity for public input then at the public hearings?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, great.
And based on the direction we get from the board, we're going to put this on the website, and we certainly, I hope we've had some discussions with members of the public. We're just not we wouldn't be holding or planning formal open houses or anything, but we're available, and Amy's been interacting with members of the public continually through this whole process.
Thank you. Mr. Salen?
Thank you. I think this is why having the space to really hear the comments that come back through public hearing is so important. I mean, the fundamental difference between regulation and not regulation when we look at dogs is significant. And certainly when it goes to public hearing, I can imagine that a lot of the public will have various comments. And for us, we'll want to be in a position where we can receive those comments and make adjustments that we think are reasonable. And so I just wanted to flag that. And I think when we post on the website and when we speak at a public hearing, we really will make sure that we identify the intent of where we're going, is that it is easier for us to address concerns that the public raise if we have regulation. And in the absence of regulation, I think we're going to see many frustrated individuals, both public, elected officials, and staff, as we navigate something that simply doesn't have tools in certain areas. And so, this is really an important part of the message. And at the end of the day, it'll be an important part of the decision-making process. So I just wanted to add those comments.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions about, it said freshwater lakes. So are we also intending to regulate Great Central Lake?
Yes,
Staff.
it would be Great Central and all the other lakes that we have.
Okay, but anything that's in there right now is grandfathered in?
Yes, that's correct.
And do we have any regulations for marinas?
Yes, we have separate marina zoning that covers. Currently, there's 2 on Sprout Lake. There's some zoning specifically in Bamfield, in the Hewlett Harbor area within the regional district. So yes, we do have specific marina zoning and also specific like waterfront commercial zoning.
Thank you. So one more question. Could I or my neighbor apply for a marina designation?
Yes. Yes, anybody could apply for the marina designation, in front of their property with the right permissions from the owner of the bed of the lake. I think that's the key component.
Thank you. One more question about the Ministry of Transportation lake accesses with the mini marinas on them. Is there any kind of policing or that type of interest from the regional district to be able to regulate those mini marinas at this time or future?
So we can currently we cannot regulate them. We have no jurisdiction over those.
Sorry, I don't understand why we don't have jurisdiction on those when everybody else on the lake, we're trying to regulate Mosaic's private land, but we're not.
So we can. Sorry. Currently we can't. I can work with Amy, and we can report back on that. That's a legal question. I don't have that one off the top of my head about is there going to be differences with the Ministry of Transportation. There's portions where we cannot regulate the province, right? So where somebody is a private person either has a lease or is entitled to use the foreshore in front of them, that's an area that local governments can regulate. If it is exclusively a provincial or a federal jurisdiction, we do not have the authority to regulate. We can put zoning in place, it just doesn't. We don't have the authority to enforce that. So I can report back on that. That's where the difference is. Sorry, I wasn't clear previously.
Thank you. I'd really like to hear back from the Ministry of Transportation on this in the future if staff could ask them to attend a meeting, that would be awesome. I have Director Bodner and Director Shannon.
Thank you. I'm wondering when they're building these docks, what is the regulations around the flotation that's being used? Is styrofoam still being used? Or is there any regulations around it?
So currently there isn't any regulations around what can be used. So the new official community plans that have received first reading do include development permit areas. I'm sorry, I should back up. For the areas around Sprout Lake, there isn't any regulations. In Bamfield, there is, because there's development permits in place. So again, a development permit is required for a dock in Bamfield, and that takes into account, how the construction of the dock and the impact that construction or the type of materials would have on the environment. That currently doesn't exist around Sprout Lake, but that is proposed in the OCP that's had first reading. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Shannon?
Thank you. So my question is on fresh and marine water, where I know we're talking about dock size. Is there any regulations if you have log booms around your place or your dock to protect from weather and debris and things like that? Like if we're talking about size of docks, like for that area where you might have log booms out there, has that been considered? And if we don't have to worry about it, then we don't worry about it. Just a question I had.
Can staff answer that?
Yes. Quick consultation with Amy. So we haven't proposed regulating that. Where the province has jurisdiction, they do regulate that. And then we've had instances where we've worked with navigable waters, where if it becomes a navigation hazard, to have things corrected as well. But it's outside the regional district jurisdiction.
Thank you. Are there any further questions on this? Seeing none, let's move on to the next. So that would be number 5, I gather, or no, number 4 or 3. 3, 4.
Yeah, I think we've touched on the docks and the structures on docks.
Okay.
So it talks about the number of RVs in the different zones. So Amy and I are happy to answer any questions and get feedback from the directors.
Okay, great. Any questions?
Didn't Director Beckett have a comment on the days?
Yes, I've Director Bodner and then Beckett. Thank you.
Thank you. How is it going to be monitored as to, especially for somebody who's staying in an RV for 60 days? How is that going to be monitored?
Yes, so all of our zoning bylaw is complaint based. So we would be responding if and when we received a complaint.
Thank you, Director Beckett and then Director Shannon.
Thank you. I wanted to speak to the 60 days for the use of an RV. And I know that Mr. Erg has already talked about, the challenges associated with, renting RVs, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm just going to be, use a specific, situation in Bamfield where, rightly or wrongly, there are a number of folks that do rent out an RV to seasonal workers that are here for the 4 months. Given our fishing season, sports fishing season is primarily June, July, August, and September. So I just throw that out as trying to address the challenge of not having seasonal worker housing slash income for some of the folks here. Just wanted to raise that as a reality for our community.
Thank you. So would this be allowed then if there's no complaints?
Well, I mean, it's not allowed if it's not in the zoning, if it's contrary to the zoning bylaw, but again, we respond to complaint basis. And I mean, these things are happening. I think it also, highlights the housing issues that we need to talk about. And, I think most of the time, probably everything's okay. But once we, I think something for the board to consider on these types of situations. So the process is it's complaint based. So if we don't have complaints, we're not out there, keeping track or issuing tickets, without complaints. But if it is legalized, then we don't have the ability to regulate. If there is complaints, or if the RVs say are substandard. So where we do have those abilities in instances with the building code, and then in conjunction with the fire department, things like that. There is some contingency. I think those are just some things to keep in mind as far as what we do, and also to keep in mind that the next 4 things we're talking about. This is an increase from what's currently permitted, and those the current bylaw has been in place since 1973. So I think that's also important. But again, we can go wherever we want with the board. I mean, there is specific zoning that could happen. We could zone for campsites, and there's also the option for temporary use permits for a period of time while businesses address staff housing. And one of the good things about temporary use permits is that you can build things in. So, for example, if there was RVs being used for staff accommodations, you could build in an inspection process, and that could be at the cost of the property owner, where we don't have that ability in zoning. So, just we have other tools than just zoning to deal with some of these things.
Thank you. I was going to ask about the temporary use permit for a situation like this where seasonal workers would be able to have accommodation for the season, but not just open year round. I do have Director Shannon. If Amy wants to answer, we'll go first there. Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify because Director Beckett, you had started your comment with referencing 60 days. So I just wanted to be clear what we are proposing. So currently in a rural, so the 60 days will be in a rural zone. So if we're looking at Bamfield, yes, there is some rural zoning, but around the inlet, there's quite a bit of residential and or commercial zoning. So that time limit would actually be 15 days is what's being proposed, not the 60. So it obviously depends on your zone, but that 15-day maximum is an increase from our current 24-hour 1 day that's permitted, right? And so rural zones we're proposing an increase from the current 30 days to 60 days. So just wanted to clarify that it's actually mostly 15 days.
We'll go back to Director Beckett and then to Director Shannon. Thank you.
Yeah, I just thank you for clarifying that and then allowing me to respond to that, Chair. I think given that response, it just makes it even more challenging for our community, given the additional restrictions associated with commercial. And I get it that as long as it's complaint driven, then it perhaps won't impact our community. But the optics of as Mike has pointed out, if it's written as such, you are you are not complying with the bylaw. And I'm just trying to avoid, the challenge, and nor do I want to see us hiring more bylaw officers to proactively address what our board establishes as a bylaw. So I don't have any answers, Chair. I'm just trying to be a realist in moving forward and trying to establish something. And again, I'll just finish off by saying I like the idea of not, I like the idea of only enforcing when we have complaints. My neighbor has a trailer that he allows for one of the fishing guides. So quiet, don't even know they're there. I have no issue whatsoever. Now, if it was a party, frat, house kind of operation, I would be concerned, and I would want the ACRD to take action if that wasn't appropriate. But again, it's funny because the conversation I had with my family upstairs today regarding this meeting was, we have to ensure common sense applies to everything we do. And while not everyone, uses common sense, we still need that approach in addressing our challenges today. Thank you.
Thank you for that conversation. I really do think that we need to start looking at the temporary use permit for this. Director Shannon.
Thank you. I just want to start before I dive into my comments on this. On page 9, when we're talking about, if everybody wants to go back to it, I'll just read it out. It says, while an official community plan sets the long-term growth structure to guide development, it's the zoning bylaw that responds to private interests on a property by property, project by project basis. This context means the zoning bylaw should respond to ongoing changes in market conditions and socioeconomic factors, and is necessary to update and adjust to maintain its relevance to current issues, ideas, and policies. So keeping that in mind, when we're talking about RVs, and I know not ideal, but when we're looking at, as Bob just talked about, housing issues in different areas, and if on rural properties you can alleviate that, even if this went through now at 6 months to a year on rural properties and it's not working, so it gets adjusted in 2 or 3 or 5 years while we're seeing these crises in our area, then I think it's something we can try, and you can educate. And I mean, I like on page 15 where, because I mean, the Beaufort APC and the Ag Committee were quite open to, we should be more permissive of this, especially with the cost of building. One of the examples that came up for an area in Beaufort were farms, and trying to keep the farm going was, hey, the parents are getting older, they don't want to build another house, but the kids want to come in, but the house isn't big enough for everybody. The parents would rather give the house to the young family to live in, and then they're happy to live in an RV and stay on the property and help with that transition. Or one of the examples was, hey, then I can snowbird and go down to the States for 6 months and come back and help when I need to. So I think for those reasons, I think a 60-day maximum on rural zones, and I know this is where it has come up with Beaufort might be different than other areas in the regional district where it is more appropriate in that agriculture sense, or those larger properties where, why not allow people to stay out there longer if we're in a crunch right now? I mean, be it you're out on a farm, or in Bob's case, you're in Banfield and you need housing for people for the season where you're really busy. Again, I understand, and I acknowledge all the issues that you can have with RVs and things like that, and that it's not ideal, but I think we need to listen to the constituents and maybe think a little bit outside the box here. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Salin, do you have something? And then Director Bodner.
It's a fair point, and I think married those comments to Director Beckett's comments on exercising reasonable approaches. I think what we always aim to do is create a tool that allows for the right dialogue. And so the base tool says, here are some rules, and this is the reasoning for the rules. As we mentioned earlier, RVs are not built for long-term dwelling, and so we have some health and safety concerns around that. We have some concerns around, water hookups and where sewage is going and all those details when we look at the long-term use. So when we're talking about amending, I think this is where the temporary use permit comes in and the building in of those safeguards against those concerns, where we'd be able to go in and say, sure, you know what, if we're stopgapping an immediate crunch, a temporary use permit starts for a 2 or 3 year period, depending on where you are in the ACRD, and can be extended. And in that period, we can say, you know what, we do want to take a look at some of the details. We want to make sure that you're not seeing mold issues, or so we want to do a regular frequency inspection. We want to make sure that sewage and water is properly hooked up so that you're not causing an environmental concern. And beyond that, work with our community so that we can find these temporary solutions. So I think everything that's being said is bang on. The question is, how do we build the right tool in a way that we can facilitate good dialogue with the public and effectively see a throughput where we can meet those needs. Obviously, the tool wouldn't be useful if you have an immediate need and it takes us 18 months to process the request. So we, in everything that we bring forward, we have to make sure that we're considering all those angles.
Sorry, yes, follow up, Director Shannon, then Director Bodner.
Thank you for the response. Like I said, I heard from a lot of my constituents that they'd like to see longer. And I just want to point out on page 15 for this staff recommended option, where if you're going for a rural zone in 60 days, if you are for that and you have additional requirements for screening, setbacks, a connection to sewage disposal, and I would assume part of that is going to be water. If somebody on the property is investing to make sure all that's happening, whether they're putting in a septic field or they are contracting to have that picked up or putting a water line in, I think that's showing an investment on their part that they're trying to do things safely, and that if you're that 60 days is a little light. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Bodner, finally.
It's okay. Thank you. I agree with what Director Shannon was saying. And I think even though the bylaws are there has to be some kind of flexibility and common sense. Somebody could have a temporary permit and you find things, well, there's complications, okay, but it's an opportunity to work with the person who has taken it. But I think somehow we have to stay on top of those things so that we don't get into a situation where somebody gets a temporary permit and it's forgotten and it becomes a problem, like we had with a situation here a couple months ago. So I think it's important to stay on top of these temporary use permits so they don't get out of hand, and to be able to be flexible.
Thanks. There's the seasonal worker homeless issue versus the recreation use, which I'm sure that everybody at Sprout Lake will be applying for that ability to have as many trailers or campers or whatever on their lots as possible. So definitely there is a difference in the community. So if there's any other issues on this, Director McNabb.
So I think one thing we and the planning department really need to investigate and understand is actually the sewage load on RVs versus like a mobile home. When I had an inspector at my place at Sprout Lake for my septic system, we talked about that, and the density of sewage coming from an RV is much higher. There's not as much water going through the system, and when you drop it, you drop the whole thing. You can't run an RV with the black water open because it'll build up inside and it won't flow through. So you're dumping that whole 100 gallons at once, and a sewage treatment system has to be designed to take that load, and especially when you get to more than one unit. The other thing in areas that have water systems, Beaver Creek specifically, an RV that would be used for long-term should be a secondary use of the water system. And I'm not quite sure how we handle that, but if there was another building on site, it would be secondary use. And if there's long-term RV, you're going to use as much water as a secondary building as far as showering and so forth. So those are things to consider when we're looking at this on long-term things.
Thank you. Director Shannon? Oh, okay.
Sorry, I'll just verbalize. I had sent in the chat to everybody. It was my understanding that this is for one RV or unit per property. When we start talking about multiples, my understanding that this is for one.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can we move on then to storage and parking of vehicles, boats, RVs, etc.? Try and get through this agenda.
Yep, and just quickly, once people just we've had lots of feedback on this topic as well, and you know, the recommendation from staff on this one is to allow the up to 4, you know, a combination of any sort of boats, trailers, RVs, etc. So that 4 can be stored in the property, and happy to get feedback and questions from people.
Okay, is there any Director McNabb?
So what I said before, kind of thing, but I don't think we've got this right, and I think we need to really identify the areas that we're talking about as residential, whether that means a half-acre lot or it means you know, if you got 6 acres and it's got a residential designation. So I think we're getting there with it. I like the idea of not determining if you got 2 boats or 3 RVs or whatever. The combination is fine, but we may need to look at the ability for larger acreages to put them in the rear of the acreage or fence them in or screen them in or some other thing like that. Because if it goes from there to rural, you would be able to do that. And if you've got a large residential lot, you should be able to do the same thing. Thanks.
So I think the residential would be the zone property. So I'll use the current zoning terminology, I think, because that's probably what most everyone's familiar with. So if you're in an R zone, so that would be R1, R2, RA1, RA2, RA3, etc., or up to those 1 acre parcels, that's the residential. And then the rural would be the A zone properties, which will be in the new zoning bylaw, they just be called rural R properties instead of A properties. So there may be the odd property that has residential zoning. I'm trying to think, I can't think of any larger residential properties other than a couple out at Sprout Lake that have the residential zoning on them. The majority would be the A zone. What we typically see is we have a lot of the A zone properties, and then the rezoning applications to make them residential, you know, they're followed by a subdivision application. So I think, you know, our assessment, there might be a couple of properties, but they'd be a minimal number that would fall into this category.
Well, I think when we had a rezoning map change, my property on Mercy Road was changed from rural acreage to residential, and it was 1.57 acres. So you might just kind of look at that, sort of what happened with that.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be what the designation in the OCP is, it would be the actual zoning designation. So we do have a lot of, and even under the proposed zone, we have a lot of properties, specifically in Beaver Creek, the non-ALR properties that are still larger acreages, they would be designated residential, but they will be a rural, if they're a zone now, they will still be a rural zone under the new property. So for example, along the Mark Road and Walker Road, there's some larger acreages in there. So you're going to have a mix of residential on the smaller lots and rural on the larger lots in the zone. But we'll take a good close look at that, make sure that we're not.
So
we're
I
not
think
missing
that's a good clarification to make, in sort of the description of this. Because if I've got that screwed up, there's at least 2 or 3 other people out there that have. Thanks.
Yeah, I think we should, it'd be good to use the actual zoning designation. So within the we'll just list out the residential zones and then list out the rural zones and maybe a table that shows currently under the current zoning, this is what residential is, and under the current zoning, this is what rural is. So that it's clear for people. Yeah, no, that's a great comment.
Thank you. That was confusing. Is there any other comments? Okay, hearing none, let's carry on to the keeping of animals. Back to staff.
Again, based on some feedback, and just sorry, I just wanted to touch on the previous one. It probably applies a little bit to the keeping of animals. Is as staff, we're so immersed in this that it makes sense to us because we're looking at it every day. So I appreciate the feedback. We want to make sure that we're communicating this out, especially to the public, so that people are understanding, what the goals are and what the actual reality would be under the new zoning. So with the keeping of animals, just again, some proposed changes for the non-ALR properties out there. So within the ALR properties, local governments have limited or no ability to regulate agricultural or farming use. So these are ones that apply to the non-ALR portions, and farming is still permitted. Again, over the years, we have had issues with keeping of animals and bylaw complaints that have taken a significant amount of time, and also wanting to have a reasonable amount of animals on properties. Right, we don't want sort of we don't want where the land isn't big enough or suitable enough for the animals. And I think it's important to keep in mind that these are the non-ALR properties. So these are the ones that don't have the good soil capabilities for the most part. So we have the ALR properties in our regional district in the Alberni Valley. They have, we have lots of class 4 land that's in the ALR. And I mean, that isn't even great for farming. It's often wet or stony or a combination of both, with some hills in it. So, so the properties, having a large, say, number of horses or cows, you don't have land that's necessarily suitable or producing, much as far as hay or grass for them. So I think those, that's an important factor. As well as we have some properties that, they're older, long, narrow properties, and they may be, 2.5 acres, but they're narrow. They are like residential size widths. And again, we have some issues on those where people have keeping of animals, have been a problem. For example, the house on the property with the chicken coop, the house is far away, but the neighbor's house is right next to the chicken coop. And you end up with those problems. And it's trying to balance out where we want to allow and provide all kinds of, lots of new opportunities for agriculture, but also balancing out, the impacts on the rest of the neighborhood. So again, open it up for question.
Thank you. Questions? Director Shannon?
Thank you. I just wanted to comment when we were in the agriculture meeting, when the staff recommended option on page 16 here is option A for the updates. But from what I gathered from our meeting, option B, without putting a number on the animals and then going more along the lines of lot size and setbacks and screening, would give more flexibility for people who want animals, particularly meat birds, or when you're going through hatching eggs and you've got an X amount of number, and just trying to go on the route of all regulation, but instead go more education and promoting food security and food sources locally and try a new approach. I see stat, I realize that would be tricky, but I really think that that was a smart way of looking at it and seeing what's viable with the number of birds or livestock that you have to make it economical to do it, because things are getting very expensive. Feed, supplies, everything. I know that's with like every industry right now, but just to keep that in mind, because that was a big conversation we had in our meeting. And kind of the system change approach that we have that grant for from the Vancouver Foundation is this whole systems change approach to local food production. And the thought was maybe we could start leading by example with some of our zoning bylaws as we move forward. So I just wanted the other EA directors to know that that was a good chunk of our meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McNabb?
Yeah, on the rooster thing again. I mean, I know whatever we do here, we're going to get complaints and things come back to us because we've had lots of rooster incidences in the past. But in talking to some of the people that have birds, the rooster thing is really important to them, and the sort of the continuance of having adult roosters available for protection is important. So I think we need to add that, just that word adult, and we need to define what an adult is. I'm not quite sure when a chick becomes a rooster, but likely 6 months or something. 4 to 6 months. Is that right? Okay. He knows more than I do. He lives in the boonies. So anyhow, so we need to define that, because the continuance of having an adult rooster available is important, because they do have because of their behavior, they end up getting in trouble. So it's just a point. Thanks.
Thank you. I have an issue with animal setback from the lake, which is drinking water at 15 meters setback. I don't think that's enough. Just because of issues that have happened at Sprout Lake in the past from a farm across the road where drainage came through a ditch on the road down through the property and into the drinking water at the lake, where people were getting E. coli poisoning. So I'd like to revisit that. And then I have Director Bodmer. Thank you.
Thank you. Because I've been around horses for over 30 years, I have a little bit of concern regarding the 1 to 2 livestock in lots smaller than an acre. So there's no discriminating as to how big those smaller lots could be. And I have seen people, trying to keep a horse in a corral, which is not even humane. I mean, they have to move around. The next thing you know, they're chewing fences and digging holes and can't find anything green around there at all. So my concern is that, and putting 4 horses on, if you're allowed to put 4 horses on 1 acre, you still have that problem of space. So that's just a comment.
Thanks. Amy, do you want to reply?
I have a few things to clarify. So the first one, the comment around the number of horses that would be allowed on a 1 acre property. We're proposing to increase that from 1 to 2. So it'd be a maximum of 2 horses or cows, like livestock, on a 1 acre property. So I think that's less than what you were speaking to, Director Bodner. And then just looping back to Director Shannon and Cote's comments, on page 20 of the report, there's a table that lists a number of changes that staff are proposing to just make to the March version and have that included in the next one. So we opted to not include them for discussion today. So on that list are things like you brought up, Director Shannon, about temporary allowances for breeding, replacement of stock. So we are putting, regulation in there to support that. We're just fine tuning what that exact wording sort of looks like, and we can reach back to the Ag Committee and whatnot if we needed to for that. So a number of things in number 2 there on keeping animals, as well as Director Cote, we're looking into further around clarifying and or increasing that setback from water courses for livestock. So the Ministry of Agriculture has a guide for bylaw development in farming areas. And so they do have a recommendation to have a 30 meter is the maximum setback from a drinking water source. That's also something that we're going to be sort of looking into. So that's why we've worded it clarifying that setback. So we are still working on a number of those things that were brought up at the EPC meetings.
Thank you. Director Shannon?
Thank you. Sorry, I had to run out for a second there, but I just wanted to follow up to Director McNabb's comment about the roosters and specifying an adult rooster. My only concern with that is if you have a flock of meat birds, and I'm just worried if we put too much in there that could hinder if like you've got 40 roosters that are going to get butchered soon, and if you're in violation of the bylaw, if we get really specific.
Can staff reply?
Go ahead.
I feel like I'd want to take a look at what other local governments do in terms of, and I have looked at no one has specified adult rooster, but I can take another look again at other examples. I feel like we can probably add some language again, Director Shannon, around your example. If it's going to be something that's going to be, a meat bird that's going to be destructed soon, then that would not be included in that number, that sort of thing. So I think we're sort of getting there in what we're proposing about these temporary allowances to increase in the numbers, right? I think it can fall into that category. But we could still do more work around the adult. I just, don't want to be too specific.
Thank you. Director Bodner, do you have your hand up still?
Yes, I do. I just want to clarify that I'm reading this correctly. When the first part of number 5, it says is increasing animal limits overall to be more permissive, including an increase in livestock, so horse, from 1 to 2 on lots smaller than 1 acre. So you were allowing 2 horses to go on 1 acre. Is that correct? Or smaller than 1 acre, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. So, and then 4 on a lot, 1 to 2 acres. Yes.
Right. Okay.
So, so you had concerns with
that.
The
size. Yeah, I'm thinking you're putting more animals in a smaller space, and you're not even like there's no clarification as when it says on lots smaller than 1 acre. Like I could put it in my backyard. I mean, like out in if I was out in the country, I mean.
I too have an issue with how it's identified. There was an application at Sprout like that in the past that was denied. The property owner owned 5 acres, so it looked like having 2 horses there would be nothing. But there was a half an acre that was split off from the main property, dissected by a roadway, and the intent was to put the 2 horses on a half an acre. So if you have an acre and you have a house and you have a garage and outbuildings, that it doesn't leave very much space for a horse. It could be very small in the end. Amy, and then Director Shannon.
Sorry, to clarify, and perhaps it's just an oversight of trying not to provide too much information in her report. We still do have in the regulation that there needs to be a half acre provided on the lot for the use of each livestock. So that minimum requires, so that limits, right? So you would need to have a half acre per horse. So that wording is still in there.
Good,
so that would limit it to, right, just essentially almost just one on a smaller. So we can fine tune the wording. We're just wanting to get an indication of the support of these increases in these numbers to be more permissive with the animals overall. So that is noted. That we'll just make sure that's clarified in there.
Great, thank you. Director Shannon?
Thank you. Getting into these nitty gritties is why I like option B better when we're going by lot size and the type of animal, whether it's small or large, and doing limits based off of that.
So in terms of B, with the separating smaller and larger livestock, we as staff, we did talk about this as a follow-up from the APC meetings and the ag meeting. The challenge with that is, and looking at other examples from other local governments too, is can't a horse be small and large? A goat isn't the same size as a horse, but different livestock have different, like it's just like when we didn't want to get into basing it on animal units based on the type, right? Because it's just too much detail, but definitely looking at recommendations for from the aid directors, if there's a easier way to do this to separate the smaller and larger livestock, because it would be nice to do that. It just seemed like it was too challenging because of the different sizes of different types of animals, right? Go ahead.
But I was just going to jump in and understand what he was saying. But when you get into hogs or pigs, they can be a lot more problematic than a Shetland pony, but they're the same size. And so we have to balance this out. And also, I'm just going to reiterate what I said before about we're talking about the non-ALR portions of the regional district. So, keeping in mind within the ALR is all within the Alberni Valley, but within the rural parts of the Alberni Valley, about 70% of the land is within the ALR. Again, and that is, based on soil conditions and all of those things. So, and the other part is that, if we don't quite get it right, we can still make changes. And I expect, when the zoning bylaw is adopted, we're going to work through it, and there'll be something that will need to be updated, and that's certainly possible to do, and changes can be made, and we are proposing expanding, uses in most of these areas, and if it's always easier to add a little bit more than to allow X number of animals on a property and then find out that's really too much and it's not working out, and then to try and reduce it. So I think it's a better approach to be incremental in this. That's my advice.
Thank you, Director Roberts.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. I think when we talk about keeping livestock and roosters and chickens, I think one of the things that you have to look at is the purpose and intent. And there certainly are for example, I'm sure Director Shannon could say or could cover this for grazing purposes. It might be 2 cows per acre, but 1 horse. That would satisfy that. But people that keep them in smaller, or for example, keeping horses in a smaller area, they certainly know that they will have to feed. They'll have to supplement and all that and maintain it. And I've seen that lots. As far as chickens and roosters are concerned, cockerels, which are young male chickens, before they become Kentucky Fried Chicken or whatever it happens to be, they're usually, up to 3 months, but a lot of times the major producers keep them for 3 weeks. So again, it's purpose and intent, and I think that has to be dealt with on an individual basis. But that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any reply back from staff on any of this?
I'll just jump in on that.
Thank you.
I know when it comes to chickens and roosters, my experience with other communities is the shift to the British language on cocks and cockerels, because there is an age difference in the terminology. But it always generated some interesting comments on social media as well. I'll flag that before we go down that path. I think the other comment that I do want to make is based on Director Shannon's comments and the Ag Group. And with the extra time that we do have, it may be useful just to set a side table and re-examine some of the nitty-gritty details with our Ag Group. Because there is, wherever there's an opportunity to utilize a mobilized group that can add that value, by all means, we should just explore having that discussion, whether it's an afternoon and coffee and pastries, and let's work out the details. I think that makes sense, and that way we're spanning beyond ALR and non-ALR land. We're talking about the reality of roosters, is that whether they're meat birds or not, they're noisy, and so we start looking at with the properties and whatnot, and how to address complaints if and when they come up. So yeah, I think we have a little bit more shoulder space on that issue, and it might be worthy of that side meeting.
Thank you for that. So we do have a motion, I believe, at the beginning here. Is someone prepared to make the motion? It's quite lengthy. There's 6. That the Electoral Area Directors Committee endorse the following changes to the draft zoning bylaw. 1 to 6. Director McNabb.
So I can make the motion, but I mean, we have on all of these discussed potential changes. So how do we handle that?
So Amy has made notes. I mean, certainly, and this is the committee. The purpose of this is we want to make sure that we're on the right track. So the motion could be with, to direct staff to make the changes, and incorporating, the comments and discussion that we've had at this meeting. And then this will come back to an Electoral Area Directors Committee in December as well, with revisions. And it gives us an opportunity to make some changes, make sure that we have the general support of the committee, and get this out to the public as well. So if that makes sense, we don't have to touch on each specific change if you don't want. I know Amy has made notes on all of the discussion.
If I may add, Chair, just based on those comments, adding the language after changes in the existing resolution to just add as discussed and amended.
So I'll move what he said.
Thank you for that. And Director Beckett, second. Okay, is there anyone opposed to that? Director Shannon?
I just want to note that I still don't think 60 days in a rural zone is adequate, and I would like that revisited. So I just want to stay that all the other ones, I'm okay with the changes we've talked about and moving forward as we're working through this. But I'm not in favor of what's currently proposed for number 3.
Okay,
I was just going to mention on that. So I think I just made a note that we're going to map out some of the things. Director McNabb had asked about that. So some of these changes, I think we'll map out the properties that are impacted, and I think that will have an impact. So we need to keep in mind that the rural zones apply to some 2-acre properties as well. It's not just the large 20-acre properties. So I think that's important to look at how it impacts each area, and go from there.
so does that satisfy Director Shannon?
I'm in favor of looking how it impacts different areas, but I still feel like even if we're looking at how we had this discussion on like increased flexibility and things, or we put something in there about the temporary use permits and maybe look into a process for that specifically for RVs, for rural areas, for those that need more than 60 days or would like it due to current economics, housing, all those kind of things. So we have that readily available, and I'm not talking like a TUP taking a year to get, just so that's in there, that those options are there, that we're looking into that, is my main concern.
Thank you for that. So can staff work with that?
Yes, and I was just going to note that we've had some internal discussions around trailers and the current situation, like RVs on properties, the current situations, and we'll be bringing some information back to the board on that, and working with planning staff and bylaw enforcement around that. So, I mean, we're aware of it. It's sort of happening outside the scope of this project.
Okay, thank you. All right, with that, I'll call the question. And again, are you changing your vote to a yes, or is that a no?
I will be in favor of it as long as it's my
Okay.
thoughts realized about those numbers. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I'm going to say it carries, and say thank you to everybody, and ask, is there any late business? Seeing none. Question period, participating in person in the boardroom or in Zoom or email.
Madam Chair, we do have 2 members of the public present in the boardroom, and we do have 1 attendee online. So the attendee online, if you're wanting to ask the committee anything, please give me a message in the Q&A. And yes, and we have 2 members of the public here.
So is there any questions or comments?
Yeah, just comments really. Particularly, I've been following this process.
Could you please state your name?
Sorry, I'm Graham.
And where you're from? Thank you.
Graham Tate. I'm a new member of the APC for Beaufort.
Thank you.
And I've been kind of following this process for the last few months, and it seems like a lot of these changes are driven by the areas that have quite distinct, denser urban areas. So Cherry Creek, Beaver Creek, Sprout Lake, each have some pretty dense residential areas, whereas Beaufort is entirely different. It has no urban kind of core area. And, a lot of these proposals just seem completely inappropriate to Beaufort. I understand the difficulties in separating it off and the costs and the time involved. But certainly with, the keeping of animals, limits in Beaufort, which is a true rural farming community, limits on livestock is inappropriate completely, I think. I understand, particularly Diane Bodner brought up some density issues. There's the SPCA can enforce, if it animal cruelty issues, but Yeah, in a rural farming community, limiting the number of chickens, roosters, animals just seems entirely inappropriate. And I think Beaufort is quite different from most of the other electoral areas in that respect. Yeah, I would ask that more consideration is given for rules are appropriate to reality in certain areas rather than trying to make one hat fit everybody. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And your comments will be recorded, so and provided to the next board meeting. Thank you. Is there another comment or question?
You ready for me?
Yes.
My name's Darren DeLuca. I'm at 2593 Old Nanaimo Highway.
Thank you, Darren.
I have a couple comments related to the agenda here today, and particularly into the zoning timeline. I'm supportive of extending the time for it. I think you've done a lot of work, but you're not there yet. I don't think you're going to have time to sort of rush it through between now and the next board. But to Director McNabb's point, this isn't a lame duck board. You have work left to do. There's a lot of time left here to do it. And so in your report, it's noted that there's 22 active zoning applications. And Mr. Erg also identified 70 other somethings. I'm not sure what the other 70 others were. There's a lot of work on the desks of the planning staff. And those are people who are waiting, living their lives, waiting for things. And, I had the experience where it took 8 months to get my fill permit addressed. A very simple review that was to go to the ALR. And so, it stalls everything, right? Life goes on as we go through this process. So I think it's important that if you do decide to move ahead with pushing bylaws into the next year or whatever time frame it is, that you also put a timeline together to address this backlog of rezoning applications. There needs to be a very aggressive timeline in respect to that and get those off the desk. People have been waiting months and months and months. I'm aware of someone who had to wait 16 months for a lot line adjustment in the Beaufort area, right? And just all those types of things. So I would really encourage you that if you do advance the bylaw rewrite, that you do actually put a timeline together for the work that's on the desk now. The other thing I wanted to comment on was your agricultural issues around 1.4 enhanced agricultural development as part of your strategic plan. You have 2 fill applications coming before you at your main board meeting. And what the ALR says in their fill bylaw bulletin number 7, they talk about referrals to government and what you're to do when you get these reviews. You review, you comment, and you recommend. So it's more than just to forward an application. You vet the application, you adjudicate, and you make recommendations. So in particular in mine, it's like, yeah, didn't break the OCP, didn't stop any bylaws, let's forward it on. And I think in your efforts to enhance agricultural development, you need to be more proactive in your approach when these things come before you. If it was just going to be about the OCP and the bylaws, it didn't need to go to the agricultural committee. But clearly you wanted their point of view on this. And so you sent it there. They've made recommendations, and I think the board needs to consider if those are appropriate recommendations and then move them forward in the process allowed by the ALC. So those are my comments. I did have one other question, though. You have on page 20 of your agenda a series of items that were proposed changes. You didn't discuss them, or what was maybe the status of those? It's this table here.
Can staff answer that at all
Thank you.
this time?
So the table on page 20 is essentially a summary of things that comments received from public, APCs, the Ag Committee, etc., over the months on the March 14th version of the zoning bylaw. So these items here are things that staff are proposing to make to update that March version, which then that version would then be available for the public to review probably in September and provide feedback on that again. So we are proposing to include all of these.
Right.
And then in number 4, I'll note that there's a few other things we didn't want to include a laundry list, but we are still working with a number of like people with comprehensive zone development zones and things like that about, you know, some small changes. So happy to keep receiving feedback, you know.
Okay, I mean, there's lots of good stuff in there. I didn't want to see it get lost. Really
yes,
my
so definitely that this is what we're proposing to include in the next draft, these changes listed.
Great, thank you. So just I guess on my putting together a timeline to address the zoning, and I don't know if it's permits or what these other 70 items were. Mike, I didn't catch what they were, but there's a significant amount of work to be done, and I think this board, I think if it sort of sits back like a lame duck board for the next 3 months, that's a real loss to the community. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And is there anything, Wendy from, or Ms. Thompson from online?
No, there's nothing from
No,
online.
nothing further?
Oh,
Okay,
sorry, it looks like the attendee has raised their hand, so just a moment to know. Okay, it's Heather McDonald. Heather, you should be able to speak now.
Hello, good afternoon. Can everybody hear me?
yes.
Heather,
can you please state where you're coming from?
Oh yes, I'm coming from Parksville, BC at the moment, but I live at Sprout Lake.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. The reason why I'm just calling in today is that I feel that there may be a little bit of information that I could put together for the board that would really help the board as far as RVs and RVs on the private lands. Because I think there's a lot of information regarding, you know, what people are using their RVs for and what people that are renting out RVs are potentially doing. And I think there are safety concerns that need to be addressed. And there are septic concerns that definitely need to be addressed. And I think that there's legal pieces that need to be addressed as far as what the septic regulations go, as far as having RVs on independent land. So what I'd like to propose to the board or ask of the board is I would like to put together a document that kind of, after I've been doing the RV business since 2005. And I've seen a lot of different changes regarding the residential tenancy, regarding all kinds of different things, like at all different levels of government, from what the federal government talks about regarding GST and when GST needs to be applied, from the septic part of things, of what the septic regulations state regarding RVs, what the CSA codes are as far as health and safety are regarding RVs and whether they're safe to stay in or how long they're safe to stay in, those kinds of things. And I'm just wondering if the board would be welcome to me sending in some type of a document that compiles all of this information for the board members so that when they're making the decision about putting RVs on private lands or anybody that's applying for a campground, that you have that information in a concise document that you can refer to. So I just ask for the board if they would accept a document like that.
I would refer to staff to work with you, Mr. Salen.
I think absolutely, Chair. You know, we're always open to any information coming through. Staff will receive it and then advance that as part of the public record of information received and considerations when we advance any changes in our zoning. So I think that's part of our public process, and we're certainly open and welcome to any information the public wants to provide to us.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. McDonald. Is there anything else?
Yeah, there's just one other little comment that I have about that is that I do support that we need to have some guidelines in regards to the processing of temporary use permits or any of our permits, that we need to have some accountability both from the landowner or the person making the proposal to the ACRD, but we also need to have some commitments from staff coming back that are reasonable, that staff decides maybe they can have a conversation and it can be written right into our bylaws about how long it takes to get some of those, any of, not the changes, but just like in the day-to-day operations of things, of how long it takes to do a building permit, how long it takes to do a temporary use permit, how long it takes to do any of the land type permits. I would just really encourage staff and everyone to maybe set some goals so that we can all move forward. Thank you. That's all I have to say. Have a wonderful day.
Well, thank you very much for that. And if there's nothing, Director McNabb, yes?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. We don't really need a seconder, but thank you, Director Beckett. And all in favor? Yay. We'll see you all at 1:30.